these triggers. So let's just think of, so I'm going to simulate a bunch of just Asian growth data. Simple. Just go out there and just put together a true curve, randomly sample with some around it in some fashion. And all of these ones right now, I'm doing it without any sort of like measurement error. There's process error, but no measurement error. So yeah, I'm saying we're measuring things right, our ages are all good, like there's none of that shenanigans going on. So everything I'm gonna show you is kind of best case scenario stuff right now. And again, if some of this stuff checks out of interest, then I would love to get a to-do list of things to make this into something useful for people. Okay, so pulled 1,000 samples out of a growth curve, set it up, CV length of a constant one of 10%. So just so you know, and then sample 1,000. So this black curve, which you can't see, is the true value. And if you pull 1,000 samples, unbiased, put it in there, you get basically that, which one, okay, checked out, good. So then a very simple question. What if we had a sampling protocol that for some reason, we only got 50% of whatever your Amax is. So in this case, Amax is, I set up a population, I think it's around 50 something. And so now we're only getting things into the 20s. With this particular growth, you can see that we actually still do a heck of a good job getting the growth estimate out. We're gonna explain why in a second, but just showing you some obvious stuff. All right, this next one, so okay, so half of it, so 54 was the longevity of the steak population, half age 27. All right, now let's do something crazy and extreme. Let's say we can get all of the ages, but for some reason, we cannot get anything within 10% of the L infinity. And this is the really important part here. The major thing that brought me to this was I was seeing a lot of estimates of L infinity coming from data where the L max was well below L infinity. And like, that's like an extrapolation. How well can we recover L infinity when our L max is below? So this is like the main point here. Can we estimate when our L max is less than L infinity? So this is, again, crazy example where for some reason we can't get anything, whether it's a mesh size or something, but you can get all the ages. So you're getting these older tiny ones. And of course, unsurprisingly, because you have the bend over, you're getting this really biased growth curve. That'd be terrible to use, something like this. And then if we halved it, we get that same curve here. And again, because of the nature of this fast growth, we're still getting the curvature right. And so you're able to replicate, even with truncation in the ages, a decent growth curve, but it's all about, are you including something above or below the L infinity? Okay. And then on that fourth quadrant where you're doing both, having the ages and still truncating that, you're getting this one. So basically the full sample does a great job. If you cut the Amax down, it still does a pretty dang good job. But once you start bumping L max, the maximum size of your sample is below your L infinity, things can start to get weird. Okay, so inclusion of lengths greater than L infinity, recovery good estimates. Again, we're not entering Nobel Prize in Science stuff here, but we will see in databases how often this is violated. And in this case, samples with Lmax less than, so 10% smaller, got you some really severe L infinity and K values. Okay, next issue. What happens, and this is one that, again, this is one of the ones that set me off, was a severely truncated age. So you're actually not truncating the lengths. you're severely truncating the ages that you're collecting. Why might this happen? Well, you might have low sample sizes. You might have severely dome-shaped selectivity for some reason. As they get older, they move off. The fishery is just in the near shore. Or you fish the heck out of it, and there just isn't much left. But that's all you have to get a growth curve. And in this case, and you can see here, so we said that the L infinity, the true one, was 60, right? We actually have L maxes above 60, but only a couple. And because this is so severely truncated, what's happening is that we're still caught in this sort of higher growth. And so when it overshoots the L infinity by a lot, one of the first things I encountered, I don't know how many of you met last summer, Andre Suarez. He was visiting from Brazil. He was here last summer, August through early October. And he's working on snapper assessments. And he brought a wonderful guy. If you didn't meet him, you're a lucky person. But he and I were talking, and he was showing me his growth curve, and he had snapper growth curves from all over the world, right? You get what you can, because they didn't have any in the local area. And one of these estimates, man, it's like 60 centimeters over anything else. Like everything is around 120, and this one was like 186 or something. Wow, that is a massive difference. That's an incredible possible plasticity. And like, what's going on here? But all he had was the printers. So we dug around and got the original paper, which was an older paper. And when we pulled up, and these things are snappers, they're living, I think these ones 2030. It was exactly the situation with the growth curve. It was like everything up to 5, and they fit this growth curve, and it just shot way up. We're like, wow, you do not want to use that. That does not seem right. It was interesting when we let the model try to figure out, because the dead giveaway was could not fit his length with that growth. It just couldn't do it, no matter what else you tried to do. And we're doing this stock synthesis. And when we let the model play around with that infinity, it actually put it smack dab in the area of all of these others, like 126 or 1 something. Much more of a ballpark area, and it fit the data and all this stuff. Not to say that those were the right values, but the model was compensating, like, there's no way we can ever fit this 186. You can't, it can't be that truncated. It's like 2% or something.
We have a question there.
Yeah.
Will Petrone.
One of the wills.
Whoever wants to.
I think that's me again.
Yeah.
I'm not sure this is what we would call bias. Bias is multiple replicates. And I guess my question is, did you, for this data set, did you estimate the variance of L infinity? My guess is that variance should be huge because there is essentially no real data on the asymptote. There's a point estimate, but it isn't actually a very good point estimate. So did you look at the variance of L infinity when you were doing this?
So, yeah, no, Andre, goods. I'm gonna go move over to a simulation where we do this many times. But the within model estimation, no, that's a good point. I should record that. Their within model estimate of L infinity, though, did not include the 120s. That if for that one particular snapper one that kind of set off this idea of how do we evaluate some of these things better? But I really, really, really like that idea of reporting as well how big the uncertainty is in something like this. Unfortunately, our databases often don't report that, and so you're not going to get that information. And that is kind of my worry, is when we pull things from databases, we are getting the point estimates and we're missing all of that. In your real data, as you're pointing out, Andre, we should absolutely be looking at that. In this real data set, it did not include what seemed to be realistic values, even with the uncertainty. And I don't recall it being like outrageously huge, but I like this idea of when we are estimating it, considering the variance aspect of this. And that is something in the simulations I actually could look at and report because it might help us understand maybe a little bit more whether we might be entering a territory that's a little funky. So I'm gonna bank that one in my brain. Yeah, it's great. Okay, so two issues. One issue was if your Lmax is lower than the estimated L infinity, maybe you pause and you wonder what's going on. Secondly, if you have a severely truncated one, you may also pause. You're going to see here though that it isn't every time. But in this particular case, I'm showing you an example where it did, the samples did. This is just a random one sample, it just happened to do this way. That one snapper was another bit of tiny evidence that things could go wrong at some point. So that brings us to maybe, let's just, yeah.
How do you know it's truncated?
Well, we were going off the presumption that these things have a longevity. You have some other estimate of longevity. They should be around 30 or something, and they're only seeing, well, we didn't know, right? Because we only had the Bertalanffy parameters. It wasn't until we got the original paper that saw that they were sampling individuals 2 to 5. Like, ooh, that seems a bit truncated. And so I'm going to mess around with what percent truncation do you start to see this possible bad behavior. Yep. Okay, so the next set of slides are a bunch of simple simulations. Again, setting up a population just like I did before, but basically just repeating the random sampling of data around a true value many times under different life history setups. Now you can set up life history a ton of different ways. Again, I'm just starting this stuff out, so I just threw together, actually this should not be 3, that should be 2, but believe me, it's 2, not 3. This is me using the M/K ratio. Something 0.05, what that means is something grows fairly quickly and it sits at its asymptote for a long time. It's kind of what I've been showing you already. It's kind of what our rockfish do, where they actually grow for their life history fairly fast and then sit there. 1.5, moderately fast, and then a 2, it's gonna take a bit longer to get to its asymptote. I looked at number of samples we sample out of this tree population, 100, 200, 500. I'll show you those. Quick point, none of these really matter. So I'm gonna move past the sample size thing fairly quickly. They were not worth confusing you and showing you a billion different plots that didn't change much. I'll show you one. So not much going on there. And then this type of sampling. What percent of L infinity, right? 90% of L infinity, we're gonna truncate stuff. And then some percentage of the maximum age relative to M. And so I was setting up life history relationships to help me put together this little fake population. So I was using Owen's formulation, 5.4 divided by Amax. That's basically what we use as a longevity estimator of natural mortality. So I would define an Amax, that would give me my M. My M would then, under these different ratios, give me the K. And then I kept, because they're just scaling right now, the 2 toes, the big toe and the pinky toe, L infinity and K, they both just stayed at, I think, 50 and -1. Because that's just scaling. It doesn't matter if you're stretching stuff out. So I just kept that constant for right now. So mostly just changing K to get different growth up to the L infinity, and how much are you truncating your sampling and messing around to create estimates of, potentially biased estimates of the parameters that we care about. So set up life history, set up the number of samples, and in this case I drew 500 simulated random draws. And then I'm reporting to you mostly 3 things. One, the estimated, I think I may have flipped this around, but I think I flipped this around now. It's the theoretically estimated L infinity versus the true. Then it's the theoretical estimate versus Tmax. I'm sorry, Lmax and your estimated L infinity for versus your Lmax. I think I may have flipped all these because I wanted them below 1. But basically these ratios, your true, your estimated versus your true, and then your estimated or true L infinities versus the Lmaxes. Okay, so let's start with perfect thing we shouldn't. So this is full sampling. So all the samples, and again, samples of 100, 200, 500, you can see that the ratio of the estimated L infinity, I'm focusing on L infinity. Everything's on L infinity. How good do we get L infinity? So the ratio between what you estimated and what the true value is like dead on for all these samples. So again, we're just going to skip the sampling stuff for right now. And then this is an example of the Lmax versus the T infinity. So this is just saying our Lmaxes are above our L infinities, right? They're above 1, which is what you probably get if you sampled the population well, because your asymptotic size is not your Lmax. Okay, so this checks out, just confirm simulations are working as we want. Okay, we're going to walk through just 4 or 5 slides here, I think, of different simulations where we truncate our sampling so we only get L infinity, 90% L infinity. I don't know why I had that twice until I did this over the week. Some of this while watching the national championship basketball games of the last 2 days. Okay, and so what we're seeing here is across these different life histories, they don't respond exactly the same, which we would expect. The faster growing, slower growing ones, the faster ones to L infinity give you less bias, right? We should be on this line, but we're down here. And remember, we've told it that you can only have 90% of this. Well, 90% is your Lmax, so you know your L infinity is going to be even lower than that. And that's why that's coming in here. But these other ones that are growing slower to the L infinity are taking even a bigger hit on what's representing the lengths to get your growth curve. So you're getting even more bias as you don't have these extremely kind of fast growing. So slower growing ones to L infinity, you're going to get a bit more bias possible. Yeah, so the response so far. Yes.
Yeah, one of the Wills again. You know, this is a truncated distribution. Did you ever consider writing a likelihood function that incorporates that truncation? So, I mean, really, when we do our stock assessments, we use conditional age at length data, which essentially does the truncation for you, which is why we sort of use it that way. I mean, with conditional age at length data, you don't need to worry that you're truncated at a particular length because it's automatically calculated. Whereas you've got truncation, but your estimator isn't aware of that. And I think there is an estimator that allows you to do that, where if you know you've got a truncation, you can incorporate that.
Yeah, no, that's great, because one of the things, so this was let me do something quick and dirty to see if it confirms some of these biases, and then can I improve my sampler, because I wasn't super happy with this really coarse sampling design. It's good to achieve the initial observations, but I'm absolutely with you. I do want to improve the way that I sampled this to make it a little bit more nuanced. And so yeah, if there's a sampler out there that already does that, I would love to know what it is.
Oh, sorry, this is the likelihood, not the sampler. So your likelihood, you generated data truncating it to 90% of L infinity, but if you fit a model where you account for that truncation, which is usually due to selectivity, you can I think you might get less bias.
Yeah. No, that would be a good next step for me to incorporate in the. I'm just using an NLS sort of thing, so to fit this in the more straightforward way. I agree. Adjusting it for maybe known selectivity as we do in our assessments in synthesis at least, I think would be great. So yeah, that's going to be another thing for me to do next. Because some of this stuff performs a little bit better than I thought. I shouldn't say better. No, it's usually performing not so great, but a little. I think there's a little bit more to it. Maybe say that one. I think part of what I'm thinking you're articulating in the correction for the selectivity. Yep. Okay, good. We got to keep that in mind. Over here, so the pairing of plots we're going to show you is one is just what is the true versus real ratio. It should be 1. If it's different than 1, what's happening? And then over here are these more intricate looks that I'm using the 1.5 to kind of dig into. And this is showing you that, for instance, the L max versus, so how your biggest sample versus your theoretical is really all over the place versus your estimated, that's this value right here. And then this one is your L max versus your estimated, and it is, sorry, so for your theoretical, your L max is all over the place, whereas it's very consistently related to what you're actually estimating. And it's always, the L max is always above it, which you would expect, right? So that's, you expect to see this. This is defined by this, that's that bias, and then the real versus the L max is all over the place. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. So if we walk through this in those 4 quadrants that I showed you, let's cut the A max in half. We had shown that it does a pretty good job before. And you can see for the slow growing, I mean, the one that fast grows, it does, again, that really good job. But again, as you're slower growing, you start to create a little bit, still does a pretty good job, but even any truncation in the ages, depending on your life history, you might start to get above or below estimates that are a little biased. And again, this is breaking down the M over K equals 1.5 version where you're seeing a little bit of bias there. Okay, so in the theoretical version, this performed great when it's fast growing. As the slower growing to asymptote, you get a little bit more bias. All right, let's add both of those things together. And as you can imagine, if you're chopping your A max by half and adding that other additional thing, you're getting even wackier stuff going on. And this one's giving you some really weird stuff. This one still performs sort of as we expected because it gets you. You just get so quickly to that asymptote that you really have to truncate it pretty far to mess it up. But if you're not sampling any of the biggest ones, you're imposing that. So all with the caveat, as Andre's saying, with no correction for selectivity. Oh, and this was just looking at, this is the 1.5. If we looked at this funky one, 2, M of K of 2, you can see that these L maxes are now just kind of all over the place. The estimate is all over the place. The L max versus the estimated L infinity is all over the place. Whereas the L max to the true, or I'm sorry, the theoretical, that's always fixed. I think that's really important is your L max and your estimated are just gonna be adjusted no matter what. But you can create some real crazy looking bias with that. Okay, and here's the one that I was a little bit more surprised on. I did that 20%, so much more reduced one. And this is the one where we saw the bias being over here, where you're getting estimated L infinities higher than the true. Whereas here, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing definitely you get that. You absolutely get that, but not all the time. And for the one that grows really fast, again, you really have to truncate it. I truncated it down really, really far, and it still was, if anything, was getting more biased on the small side, not the big side. That kind of confused me. So I was having a hard time replicating what we saw in that snapper. And so this is, again, me going, I wonder what I can do to achieve some of these things that I've seen in real life. So I'm thinking through that.
One more question, it just sort of crossed my mind. You're saying A max, and then you're changing M over K, right? But in some sense, doesn't A max depend on M?
Well,
Because if you've got
A max is defining M.
Sorry?
So I define an A max that defines M. M will then change the K
Okay.
based on one of three. Yeah, so it's all connected that way.
Okay, yeah, I missed that.
Cascades.
Sorry. So when you have a high
all
M, A max is quite low. Super low.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. Super low. That's right. Okay, so now we've established possible two triggers. Lmax being less than your L infinity could be a warning. Your sample Amax, so the maximum sample size versus how much lower that is to what you think your theoretical max age is, that could be a worry. So those are two triggers. Here's the third one. All right, so you guys stick with me on this one. And I'm seeing this one more often with faster growing, whether it be tropical or some of these sort of like coastal pelagics in Southeast Asia and stuff.
I was gonna say, like, tunas, it seems like get stuff like this now.
This sort of thing, well, this exact one right here, this maximum age never reached. Yeah, so this is one, and I don't have a judgment on this one. I have a observation and then I have a question. You have a theoretical growth curve, but given the maximum age that you assume, if you play that growth curve out, you never get to L infinity. Maybe tunas are like this, maybe some places things are like this, but the problem is, if you take those and you apply like a length-only model, and you are fundamentally never able to get to L infinity, my worry is that you are already saying you're highly depleted, when in fact you aren't. You've moved the goalpost up to such a high L infinity that you're comparing to. And so your SPR is going to look all weird. And so in this case, again, this thing is supposed to live to like 50 something. But I'm sorry, no, this is a different thing. So Amax is 30. But in your L infinity 60, so in this growth curve, you have a growth curve that achieves an L infinity of 60, but you think the population only lives to around 30. For it to achieve L infinity, it's got to get to like 38.7, and so it can never get there, even if it was unfished. And so this is kind of another example of possibility where your L max is just going to be less than your L infinity. It's an unattainable L infinity, and so you might overestimate your depletion because of that in some cases. And it might also be an example of poor sampling of a population. I see this type of stuff as a result of this and this thing where you have these much higher L infinities than your L maxes. In elephant-based estimates of growth. Elephant is a length-based, not age, growth estimation approach, right? You're basically trying to follow cohorts, and you're fitting a growth curve through that. And my hypothesis here is that for whatever reason, and this is where my next step, you'll see later, I would like to kind of throw data like this into elephant and see what kind of biases I can create, because elephant is used a lot in these places where they just don't age or they can't age. There's a lot of tropical species that just can't age them, so they use lengths in order to get growth curves. And my worry, seeing repeated elephant uses where L infinity is so much higher than L max, And on top of that, you can never get to, because it would take you, it's something that lives to like 7, but you'd have to be age 20 to even get to that infinity. Something just seems kind of weird. And so that's my third trick that I suggest to you.
Jason, on that, firstly, I think LFAN should be deleted off every computer that it's ever been put on. I had a case the other day where somebody had data up to 40 millimeters and estimated an L infinity of 267. So that was using LFAN. It was so outside the range of the data. But I mean, in principle, multi-fan, if you remember that, was a way to deal with the LFAN problems, because at least it imposes a growth curve that has cohorts and stuff. LFAN is complete rubbish. And every time I see someone using LFAN, I see exactly what you would get with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
And so zero disagreement. It worries me when I see LFAN. Does it every single time give you bad results? No, I have seen comparisons where it can give you, but it can make you go wrong. And it is being heavily used all over the world. And those values make their way into databases. And so this is the next thing I want to show you. If there's any element of belief in the possibility that these 3 triggers could be symptoms of a problem in your growth estimates, L max is lower than L infinity, severely truncated age samples versus what you think maximum age is, and then thirdly, you can actually never reach your theoretical L infinity based on what you think your maximum age is in the population. If any of those 3 things are, you think, at least, given what I've shown you thus far, worthy possible triggers to just step back and think about things, let's now step over to Fisheries. Fisheries, global database, thousands of entries, right? Everything's in there. So what I did was I extracted out of Fisheries every species, not multiple entries of a species, every species that had at least one estimate of the growth parameters, at least. And so there was 2,685 species. I then pulled those species, stuck them into fish life, and pulled out of fish life, and some of those A max, L max, and L infinity. So I could evaluate these things. And that dropped it down to a little over, just under 1,900 species. So 1,900 unique species. And so I want to report to you the percentage of, in these databases that violate those 3 things that I just talked to you about. And so here is L max ratio to L infinity. We want it to be around 1. Here's, so, and here's the thing with, if you can achieve your max, you're going to get a 1, right? If your maximum age will ever get you there, you should get 1. So you really should be a ceiling around 1 for the age comparison. But the question is, how much of a truncation in that age is a worry? And so this is the Tmax relative. So this is the length at Tmax. So your theoretical at your maximum age, how big are you compared to L infinity? Again, it should be around 1. I looked at 5 and 10% cutoffs. Are you 5 or 10% lower than that? First thing, let's focus on the x-axis. This is that kind of no-brainer. Is your L max lower than your L infinity? And found that 30% of things coming out of fish case violated that 1 trigger.
How much do you trust the information in Fisheries and where it comes from?
Well, what I can tell you is people pull things out of that. And this is actually coming out of fish life. So this is the fish life digestion of the fish base. So it's putting into the taxonomic stuff and new stuff. Okay. And people, again, people use these, so I mean, I use fish life all the time to get an idea of things. And I think it's absolutely a step improved from just yanking stuff out of fish base, because it has that more of an element. But these are, again, out of fish life, these are species specific estimates. These aren't the ones that come out with, like, you know, in fish life, your closest taxonomic level if you don't have the species information. I predefine this by saying, I know that these species have growth estimates in fish base. I put them through fish life, and I'm able to grab out the overall values that put together all the multiple samples and all that stuff and take into consideration taxonomic stuff. This is what I'm gonna get, and then drop it a little bit, but about 1,900 species, separate species, 30% of them violated the simple rule of that you probably shouldn't be extrapolating your L infinity from a lower L max, or that you should at least maybe ask yourself if that's good. Let's get into this size at maximum age versus L infinity. Again, it should be around 1. If you take anything that was less than 99% of it, so it didn't really get to L infinity, but it got close, 90% of species in fish base are kind of violating that, but that's a little harsh. So let's back it up to 95.
Help
So
me. Sorry, Jason, I'm maybe a little confused. L max is the maximum size of any individual in the database? Is that how it's defined? Because by definition, L max should be bigger than L infinity, because L infinity is the average size at A max, right? Can you just make sure I'm correct in this, because you say L max should be equal to L infinity, but in fact, no, L max should be bigger than L infinity because L infinity is an average.
No, right, Andre, yeah, sorry, no. L max should be bigger than L infinity. What I'm saying is, yours for the second one, and that's what this is. This one's violating that simple one where your L max, your maximum size, which should definitely be well above L infinity. 30% of the reported L maxes are smaller than the reported L infinities in the database. So that's
right. My comment was, you said L max should be relative to L infinity should be close to 1, but in fact it should be bigger than 1. Not, I mean, I agree totally. If it's less than 1, you've got a problem. But if it's bigger, I don't think that's a problem, because the two things shouldn't, you know, that you should be above the line, not below the line.
Yeah, no, all of these are good. So everything on this side of the line is good. What I was saying that should be 1, what should be around 1 is the theoretical size at your maximum age. So if you live to 55, the size that you are at 55 should be L infinity.
Well, yeah, I agree. That makes sense. Sorry, I was confused.
Yeah, no. So sorry, we are now switching over to the y-axis. Your comments all good for the x-axis. Here are all the ones that violate. And again, these are 10% off of L infinity. There's still a chunk that aren't even at L infinity. What Andre is saying is what really we could be measuring is you should be 5 or 10% over L infinity. So I'm giving this 30% is generous. It's actually things that would actually trouble me. This line that we're measuring should probably be moved over here because we want it above L infinity. So that's something else that I could show you, but you can see it's going to go up by quite a lot. And the mean is at the median is at 6% above L max. If your CV is at 10%, you should probably be more in the 10% area to get an unbiased L infinity. And the median of the database is less than that. So we're talking 30 to 50 to maybe even 60% of what's coming out of these databases are on the surface suspect, but these 30% are really suspect. Like you might get highly biased length-only assessments by using those. But now let's switch over to this y-axis and say, if you lived to your maximum age, that size that you are at your maximum age should be L infinity. And it should be really close to L infinity. And so if it's 1% off of L infinity, 90% of the recorded A maxes relative to L sizes at A maxes relative to L infinity were off by 1%. Off by more than 5% was almost 60% of the database, and off by 90% was 23, or off by 10% was 23 of the database. So this is the 90%, right? Everything below here, and then this is okay. And so this one right here, this is putting together. What if you violated both of these? Your L max is smaller than your L infinity, and your size at maximum age is not within 5% of your L infinity. 20% of the database violates two of those. And if you got even more generous and say you're within 10% at your maximum age, that size is 10% of L infinity at your maximum age, 10% of the database is that. This is the best case scenarios of badness. It's only going to get worse from this probably. And so that's kind of what I wanted to alert you to, is what's on my mind. I know this is all good news and everyone's having a great time with everything. But I thought this was at least interesting enough to know that any of you who are routinely pulling things from databases, we might want to think about some of these relationships between how long we think things live, how they grow, how big they are before we start putting them in. I am worried, like Andre, that we have estimation protocols out there that make this worse. And the habit around the world is not to have a lot of data, it is to use databases. And so this is my worry. But even if you do have data, I hope some of these guidance are letting you understand where things might go wrong. And of course, there's pinky toe problem when you just don't even have any of the small ones. Your T0s, and that's going to be one of my next steps, is thinking about how to formulate different life histories. I did it over the M to K continuum. There might be interesting alternative configurations that could expose something a little bit interesting. Additional cutoffs for this A max, size at A max. Andre has added some very interesting stuff regarding that likelihood approach that would help me incorporate selectivity issues. Here's the other thing is, because we've built these relationships, can I go into these databases and now, having found some sort of violating examples, are their M over Ks consistent? Are they always the M over Ks that are like 1.5 or 2 or above? Or are they all over the place? So maybe understanding, are there other dimensions to this that might help us? Because I've shown you the simulations where these things degrade as we get different life histories. And that rockfish life history, an M over K of 0.5 is not common. It is for a rockfish, but around the world, and a lot of places that do stuff assume 1.5. So, and that's creating even more of a bias potential. And then I said, consider the range of T0 values. This is something, again, I didn't get into this here, but I'm very interested if sometimes you see T0, theoretically it should be maybe around 0. As we see values -1 to -3, if it starts to get to -5, you're like, huh, are we just undersampling stuff? But things that live to 100 to 200, should they have a T0 of -1 or 2? Or is there some room to have, do we expect the T0s to be a little bit more negative? Just don't know. And so I think there's a little bit of work done to help flag some of these zero values, because like with yellow eye and stuff, sometimes you get -10, but it seems like it's fitting the growth curve. You have small ones. Is it just because the scale of the ages are so big? I just don't know. So I would like to spend a little more time on, are there flags around T0 that we can build in? And explore elephant estimation, use the same data, put it into elephant and see if I can figure out if some of these ones that I'm having a hard time estimating bigger L infinities from reality, is that easy to replicate in elephant? I kind of have a feeling it is. And Andre gave a great example of one that he's encountered, I encounter this all the time. It makes me worried. And then others. So 1042 has been generous to sit through a bunch of stuff. I appreciate feedback thus far. I'm going to stop there. Would love any other additional feedback, interest. If I'm just way off on something, let me know. And if you don't want to talk now, reach out to me.
Jason, I don't know who's got hands up, but
Yeah.
in the context of estimating T0, what I found, the really bad T0s, you get the -10s, -11s, and usually that's because of selectivity when people are fitting growth curves when, for example, there's a minimum size. So by definition, if you're a young fish, you will have to be big, because if you're small, you wouldn't have been collected. So knowing the collection method, I think, helps a lot. And as you well know, I mean, we've had to occasionally supplement age length data with funky special collections of small fish and things like that. Otherwise, you're fitting the data really well, but you're not fitting the population, you're fitting the sample.
Well said, absolutely. Yeah, and that is part of my concern. And again, I don't know if I'm the only one that feels this way. I sometimes feel like that aspect of the growth curve and that issue can sometimes be stepped over a little bit easier than the Ks and the L infinities, when in fact it is going to mess up our K if we get that weird. But yeah, how we sample all of this, because the one thing, again, as I mentioned, I have perfect sampling in this. I haven't screwed my sample up. I haven't done Rosalie's phenomena. I haven't done anything else. But part of the reason there is I don't even know what the growth curve looks like when you start imposing that stuff, because some of that stuff is not evolutionarily, but it's actually changing the growth of the population. And so you have a bias, but you're also changing it because you fished out the fast growing ones. So I feel like that, I don't know how much of that I'd want to bring into this. But some of these other sampling issues, especially on the low end, as Andre is noting, fast growing ones show up. I am interested in that.
So we have a question from Ian Stewart. So he says, what about species that actually just have linear growth for their entire lifespan? Pacific halibut comes to mind.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy that they're linear. Well, we should not be using, I mean, I would love to hear from actually Ian if he's able to speak up, but like, do you use the Bertalanffy for that? I would think you just don't even.
You should be able to unmute Ian.
Yeah, I don't know if can you hear me?
Like, do they? Yeah, we can hear Ian.
Yeah, so we don't use the Bertalanffy for that very reason. And it's a pain,
Yeah,
but I guess I'm wondering about how many species you might have in these databases that really just do have a non-Bertalanffy growth shape.
Yep. Well, and to your very good point, that gets into this, I think partly into this theoretical A max thing, right? Because you would expect your size at A max never to get to an L infinity if you had this more linear growth that forcing it through a Bumber. Yeah, there is some weird theoretical out there somewhere, super high L infinity, but it's not real. And that's really one of my questions is, are we, how much of this is misspecification of the growth function versus bad sampling and bad estimation, even though the Bumber is the right function to use. But you're pointing out a really good example where you rightfully changed away from the Bumber and should not use it. I don't think we're going to be able to figure that out in these databases, but I think I think that is in this category of your AMAX, size of AMAX is just, pardon me, mismatched with your L infinity. It would be interesting to again, I'm just putting out flags. I would flag those and then go look, try to get some growth data and go, should we not be using von Bert for those? Maybe they are supposed to be linear. So that would be the flag.
But yeah, just to follow that point up, you know, I had a stock that was 300 meters long when you estimated an infinity once. I'm still waiting to see that fish. But what we found when we did that was we were playing with yield per recruit stuff, and obviously having a 300-meter fish, it produces a lot of eggs, turns out. And what was obvious when you think about it is one of the problems with these crazy growth curves is extrapolation. So if you estimate, you know, spawning biomass at F equals 0 for a linear growth model, you're going to get it totally wrong because you're extrapolating way outside the range of the data. And in some sense, that's why the sort of empirical weighted age type approach has a desirable property, because you're never extrapolating outside the range that you're seeing. So if you believe that there's a 100-meter long snapper, but there are 0 of them, it doesn't really matter, right? Because 0 times 100 meter still gives you 0. It's when people sort of misuse the growth curve and extrapolate way beyond where you should be going. So it does worry me when people use reference points and they're borrowing growth curves, because that's where the errors really can confound, when you've got the wrong growth curve. And I'm pretty sure that Ian does not calculate spawning biomass per recruit for a linear growth model going off to infinity.
Thanks, Andre. We definitely use empirical weighted age.
Absolutely, and yeah, and Andre, you're getting into the other very important point here, which is the reference point side. And if we are kind of using traditional unfished or yield per recruit or SPR-ish, all these types of things, this is where we start getting into trouble. And again, places around the world tend to look at those things. Maybe if they had some triggers that would show them, maybe that's not going to be the right thing for this particular population, because it's going to violate it, because you have these growth mismatches showing in the database in your data. That's what I'm really hoping, that these flags just put pause on people just cranking through, because I mean, many of us know that there's a desire for throughput of assessments, especially for these data limited ones, where it's like, just crank them out, just put them into these whatever models and just crank them out. And I feel like we need some real flags in how we propose doing that, because we can come up with some good data limited approaches that won't violate those assumptions, because we know that the growth is just not appropriate to take upon these yield per recruit assumptions. So this is my hope, is that we can just put flags in here, and if we applied this to something like halibut, we would figure out really quickly it violated a couple of triggers. We should reevaluate our growth curve. Oh, look, it's linear. Let's do empirical weighted age. Boom, boom, boom. It helps people make those decisions without having to replicate Ian and Andre and others who are knowing and understanding of these intricacies everywhere around the world.
I have a question about the 10% of species that were, seriously violating the assumptions. Have you looked at all into like what species groups are there a lot of there?
Okay. And I was gonna look at not just species groups, but then their M over Ks, see if there's any patterns in what are they coming from a certain region? It's like, there's all sorts of things.
Like I said sometimes, obviously this stuff is particularly good, like you'd be more worried about it if they're data limited assessments, where they're going to be more likely to pull parameters from fish-based data of the data.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how routinely stuff is put into fish-based from more recent assessments. I mean, we wrote a paper a long time ago saying maybe we should try to flood fish-based with these best estimates coming from the most recent assessments in order to build up that probability. We don't do it at our center. that's not part of our protocol. We do it like submit to the fish base. So I don't know what goes in the fish base. I know they're doing their best.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Just clarifying, so AMAX is something that's from the data?
AMAX, yeah, so from fish, like you can pull the theoretical AMAX.
So that's theoretical, so it's estimated.
It's coming from some entry. Somebody
Well,
put
LMAX is data,
LMAX is data, yeah.
but AMAX is coming from,
Oh boy, like AMAX, right, that is the bane of our existence sometimes, because like, what is that? If we knew that, we could then estimate M and blah, 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 but like, we struggle at every single assessment, like, what AMAX are you choosing? How do you, is it the oldest individual you've ever seen? Probably not. Is it a fish population? Yeah, challenging. But if that's being used, part of my point here is like, all of these things go into the other relationships people use. You use that to get your M, and M will give you a K, M over K, blah, 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 blah. And if you're, all of these things should kind of match up in some way. And if your AMAX is never obtainable, that size is never obtainable, or the L infinity is never obtainable because of your AMAX, maybe you stop and just say, I need to check this out.
yeah, because I'm curious if, you know, I'm assuming for a lot of that you work with, I'm guessing that they probably don't ever reach that AMAX. They're probably a lot shorter lived species usually.
Yeah, so we've had this discussion recently, and so for these relationships, AMAX is the theoretical population size of like a stable. You're at 0.5%. That's your AMAX. It's 0.5% of a stable population, just based only on natural mortality. And so for something like humans, that is like 100. That's what your AMAX is, 100. It's not the 117-year-old from whatever, what's it, the blue zones, yeah.
France.
It's not them, but pretty, what's that?
France,
Yeah,
117, and the claims are, I believe, old Mac was 252, but he died in 1601, so we think that's an observation error.
Yeah, Methuselah's not in that database either. But 100 is still, that's a pretty old person. So it's not the average expected lifespan, right? It's something that's farther down. So I think we still struggle with what the heck AMAX is, but it should, I think it is easy to argue though that you probably should be able to hit L infinity at whatever that AMAX is. If not, maybe like the examples we're talking here, the Bertalanffy isn't for you. Maybe you should be using something different.
Yeah, I wonder if you could somehow just threshold by AMAX. It's like if your AMAX is 7, you're most likely not going to get.
And that's kind of the next step, is to kind of pull some of these out and say, are these all short-lived species? Are they longer-lived? What are their M and K patterns? Is it coming from this one area? Like, is there anything within these kind of this that is revelatory? Now, of course, I'm not going to look at this for another who knows how long with rough eye, but
So we
You need to do your think tank on it.
yeah, I do think taking 2 weeks make me.
have a question from Kelly Johnson. Kelly, do you want to ask
Yeah,
a question
Kelly.
about it, or do you want me to read it out?
Sure. Thanks, Jason. That was really informative. I have a question that relates back to FIMS, so the Fisheries Integrated Modeling System. We're currently working on trying to create priors for parameters by pulling information out of fish life. So looking at things like maximum age or maximum length and trying to get some priors for selectivity, because you can't select fish that are older, than the maximum age or longer than the maximum length. But if these databases are fraught with theoretical errors, how much should be downstream cleanup versus pushing these things upstream that like the data just shouldn't be in fish base, because not everyone has access to think tanks like these where we find this information out and can clean stuff up downstream. So how much pushback should we put towards the authors on cleaning stuff up versus just knowledge of downstream tools knowing these things?
That's an excellent question that I think obviously it's much bigger than just the topic we're talking about here. I mean, my sort of simple approach for this was like, at minimum, could we put in flags? So if someone's pulling this information, there would be a flag there that says this thing has violated two of three flags that might make it a dubious relationship to use. And then someone who is pulling that stuff could pull those flags and say, you know what, just like, it's almost like I think of these age databases where you have multiple reads and then you have a best age. And if you don't have a best age, that usually means they couldn't come up with one, even though they read the thing 3 or 4 times, and you would filter those out. And so having the possibility to have these flags in, so people could choose for themselves, I want to filter these things out in order to build a prior for whatever. I mean, if it was built into something maybe like FishLife, which is already doing taxonomic, hierarchical sort of approach things, and phylosim and some of the stuff that Jim is doing, I probably feel better about using those things. So I think I just talked around an actual solution to your thing, but I think putting in flags, I don't know, I'm always worried about, we shall not allow people to use things anymore because we will determine what to clean up. But and maybe that is ultimately the right thing to do. I do think at minimum some sort of flagging of these things should go in, so people like yourselves and others who want to use information can say, we want to filter stuff out for possible problems. Sorry, Kelly, did that at all help? You can say no.
I don't necessarily think it's the correct way to go, but it's an opinion that should be, like put back towards FishLife and FishBase, and it's, the owners of those repositories that decide what to do. But I would think that some initial testing along the lines of what you're doing could easily be made into an R test that would just do it and potentially not allow that data in, and then go back to the author who submitted it and say, there's something theoretically wrong here. Like, check your data, then I will put it into this database. So that, because there's not going to be the downstream check we're going to check now that we know, but other people that don't have access to this think tank will never check.
Okay, so Kelly, you've kind of added a dimension that's a really important one. There's the current dimension where there's stuff already in there. Can we flag them? What I heard from you is this also, like, if you're trying to submit things, you're going to get some flags if you put in some funky stuff that's potentially funky and say, hey, we're not going to accept this for this reason or something. So there's kind of a gatekeeper on new stuff, as well as maybe flagging stuff that's already in there and figuring out how to treat it. Is that a fair way to kind of put the two together?
Yeah, as well as I think that really, like, gross negligence should just be kicked out. Like, I think that there's a difference between something that might be on the edge versus something that just theoretically could never happen. It's like a Frankenfish. And I don't think that they should be allowed to stay in the database if they exist.
Yeah, and not having any relationship to how FishBase works and every respect for them trying to formulate and provide something like this. I know they have quality checks in some way. I just don't know how it works, but your plea for the cleanest, most reliable databases seems entirely reasonable and something we should shoot for. And I certainly support that.
And I think it might be made easier if something that you all talked about earlier in the talk of having the estimates of uncertainty with these point estimates would make it where it'd be easier to say, okay, this is just like a lack of data thing versus this is incorrect estimate if you had that measure of uncertainty with it.
Yeah, I really did like that suggestion by Andre. Unfortunately, not available now, but absolutely that variance on some of these things, really, really important information to include.
Yeah, I love where Kelly's going. I do wonder the resources that people like FishBase have. I mean, the idea is to fill it out as comprehensively as possible. I don't think they've got the resources to necessarily apply any checks as far as I can see. And in one sense, they want to be comprehensive. So what you've got is the best available data, which may be rubbish, but it is what you got. So I like where you're trying to go. I'm just not sure that operationally you're likely to get there. And once you start throwing out people's data, they get pretty upset. In some places, getting your data in FishBase is sort of a publication because you're not going to publish your crappy growth curve in, well, fisheries research, for example. So that, you know, there are a number of sort of human dimensions things that come into play here that are not scientific, but they're organizational and personal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. This is an important discussion that we should continue to have. And Kelly, I'd love to follow along with what FIMS is doing. It sounds like it's trying to add a dimension to using the model that's going to be really important. All right, 90 minutes in. How we doing? I gotta go meet with my boss.
No more questions in the chat.
Phone's on there. Hey, I'm heading over.
Jimmy and Ellie said AMAX should relate to fitness somehow, and then left the chat. So,
Someone did?
Jimmy and Ellie said that.
Oh, Jimmy, yeah.
Great.
Okay, well, thanks for everyone's attention. Thanks for kicking off the spring think tank. This was fun.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.